It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. The bride and groom in hiding after a fatal fire on their wedding day. 100 people died at their wedding reception in Iraq. We have an exclusive interview. Also this hour.
The motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
House Republicans and Democrats strike a deal to fund the government for another 45 days and avoid a shutdown. The family of the school bus driver who died in a crash yesterday say he suffered a medical issue at the wheel. He and a 15-year-old victim are named. The Prime Minister arrives at the Conservative Party conference to face a rebellion from his own party over tax rises. In sport, Europe need 4 points from the 12 singles matches tomorrow to win back the Ryder Cup from the USA. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Good evening. They should be enjoying the first days of married life together. Instead, a young couple are mourning after a deadly fire broke out at their wedding. More than 100 people were killed when fireworks set alight to a hall in the city of Nineveh in northern Iraq. Now the bride and groom have spoken for the first time, telling Sky News their dream of being happy has been destroyed forever and they're now in hiding. Our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, reports.
This was the moment the fire broke out in the hall as the bride and groom danced together on their wedding day. As the ceiling started to fall, the band stopped playing as parents grabbed their children and guests ran for their lives. In their first interview since the disaster on Tuesday night, Revan, the groom, told Sky News what had happened. His new wife, Haneen, didn't say a word. She is too devastated to speak.
I grabbed my wife and I began to drag her. I kept dragging her and trying to get her out of the kitchen entrance. As people were fleeing, they were trampling on her. Her legs are injured.
This photo of the bride and groom holding hands was the last picture taken of them before the fire started. From another video angle, you can see the flares around the dance floor that might have ignited the decorations on the roof. But Revan believes the fireworks were not the cause of the fire.
On the wedding night, why did this happen? What did we do? Why did this happen?
Authorities in Iraq have suggested that the wedding hall was built out of cheap materials and 14 people have been arrested, including the owner of the venue.
That's it, we can't live here anymore. We can't live here anymore. I mean, every time we try to have some happiness, something tragic happens to us and destroys the happiness. So it's best for us to leave. She's lost 10 relatives from her family, her loved ones, her mum, her brother. She can't speak.
More funerals were held in the town of Hamdaniya on Friday. Some people lost 3, 4, even 5 members of their own family. One guest at the wedding said everyone there had lost someone.
It's true, we're sitting here in front of you alive, but inside, we're dead. We are numb. We're dead inside.
The family has now gone into hiding. Some people in their town are blaming them for what happened and saying they are responsible for the people who died. Revan and Haneen's big day, their happy day, will forever be one of tragedy. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News.
The family of a school bus driver who died in a crash on the M53 have said he suffered medical issues at the wheel. Stephen Shrimpton, who was 40, and 15-year-old Jessica Baker were both killed when the bus overturned yesterday. Our North of England correspondent, Shingi Mararike, reports from West Kirby on the Wirral.
In the words of his family, he was a loving husband and father who was caring, putting others before himself. Stephen Shrimpton has been named as the driver of the coach that overturned on the M53 motorway on Friday. The accident saw the coach hit the central reservation before tipping on its side, triggering a huge emergency response. There were 58 people involved in the accident. A number of them were taken to hospital, including a 14-year-old left with life-changing injuries. During the pandemic, Stephen volunteered at this grocer's before working here full-time, becoming a much-loved member of their community.
He was just an all-round good guy, and he will be sorely missed by a lot of people. The legacy he's left behind and with other people, you know, he wasn't just a driver. He was far more than one of our drivers. He took care of people as well. It's not just the, you know, the devastation of losing Steve and losing the little girl, the impact of all the other children, the trauma that they will carry with them.
Stephen's family, who say he had a medical incident at the wheel, have set up a fundraiser to cover his funeral costs. 15-year-old Jessica Baker also lost her life in the crash. She was travelling to her school here in West Kirby, where Jessica's classmates came to pay tribute to her. You could sense their grief about losing one of their own. Merseyside Police said that the families of both Stephen and Jessica are being supported by specially trained officers, and that they're working with both of the schools who chartered the bus to ensure that children affected by trauma are being supported. There are still so many questions about how and why this happened, but for now, at the school where every student and the driver were meant to arrive safely, the main feeling is one of deep loss. Shingi Marike, Sky News, West Kirby.
Rishi Sunak has arrived in Manchester for the Conservative Party conference and walked straight into a rebellion over tax rises. Senior members of the party, including Liz Truss, have signed a so-called tax pledge against the autumn statement. A warning that this report from our political correspondent Rob Powell contains some flash photography.
Is it time to cut taxes, Prime Minister?
Rishi Sunak and his wife arriving in Manchester to a brewing row over high tax levels.
Prime Minister, taxes.
Questions for the party and its chairman.
Think it's time to lower taxes?
Well, you know, that's a matter for the Chancellor at the right time. At the fiscal event, there's an autumn statement coming up, and I'm sure all these things will be managed at the right time.
The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has tried to reassure, telling the Times newspaper he wants to stop the vicious circle of rising tax by reforming public services and the benefits system. But that may not come soon enough for around 30 Tory MPs who have now pledged to vote against more tax rises, with Liz Truss due to lead a so-called growth rally on Monday.
The tax burden has hit a 75-year high. And when we look at cost of living, when we look at the actual hit that means for my constituents, for people up and down the United Kingdom, we've got to draw a line in the sand and say the country can be taxed no more.
Squeezed from both sides, the Prime Minister comes to conference amid warnings that higher tax levels may be here to stay.
It's a gloomy backdrop for Tory conference this year, with the party still polling way behind Labour and many MPs desperate for Rishi Sunak to do something to change the political weather. That task is made tougher by an ongoing row over the HS2 rail line, Theresa May becoming the latest senior Tory to speak out against it being scaled back, the Transport Secretary refusing to confirm if it will reach Manchester.
We're getting on with delivering HS2 between London and Birmingham. That is underway. I've been to see that being constructed. There are spades in the ground and all sorts of other large construction equipment as well.
It's awkward timing as Tories arrive in the city to a mixed reception.
It's cheaper to fly than it is to get the train. So if I was going to go London, I'd get the flight rather than a train.
You can get to London in 2 hours, 7 minutes now. You do not need another high-speed train.
I don't think they'll get a good welcome. It's not going to be, I won't say it's going to be a convivial welcome by any circumstances.
And we've got the Tory conference here this week.
Yes, the Tory conference here again.
What sort of a welcome?
Well, hopefully the trains are on strike for them as well and see how they like it. But they'll just turn up in their cars anyway, won't they?
Tension outside the party and in, sights now set on an election, but plenty of obstacles in the way. Rob Powell, Sky News in Manchester.
Well, our Deputy Political Editor Sam Coates is in Manchester and joins me now. And Sam, what do you think this conference is going to be about?
Well, Gillian, really, there are two different conferences going on here in Manchester. There's the one that Rishi Sunak wants you to notice. He's going to tell a story about how he's been Prime Minister for almost a year. And having looked under the bonnet of the government, there's quite a lot of things he wants to change. And he's going to be better at changing your life than Keir Starmer would be if the voters elected Labour next year. But that means arguing and quarrelling with a lot of the last 13 years of Tory leadership. So it's creating quite a lot of enemies. And enemies there are aplenty. Earlier today, Sky News revealed leaked WhatsApps from groups of Conservative activists, supporters basically of Liz Truss and Boris Johnson, who are raging against the Prime Minister. They don't see him as a proper Conservative. They want to overthrow him. They insult him. Some of them, one of them called him a doorknob, an insult fairly new on me. But that's why there's a second conference going on here in Manchester, one where potential successors in opposition to Rishi Sunak are holding something of a beauty parade. And over the course of the next few days, they'll be showing their wares. We get a flavour of that in the papers tonight. You've got Kemi Badenoch saying in one paper that she might not adhere to that 2050 net zero target. You've got Suella Braverman, who is attacking Elton John for his views on migration. Lots and lots of people battling and jockeying for position. But if there's one thing that ties them all together, Gillian, it's whether it's the Prime Minister standing up for motorists or those cabinet ministers positioning themselves, all the activists, they all want to shift towards what they would call conservatism. Basically a shift somewhat to the right of where the party has been. The question is, do the voters want that now?
Sam, thank you. Well, don't forget to join us tomorrow from 8:30 a.m. for Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips, live from the Conservative Party conference in Manchester. Joining Trevor on the programme, the Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove, former Home Secretary Priti Patel and the Shadow Secretary of State for Scotland, Ian Murray. Climate campaigners have been protesting about this week's decision to allow exploration of the Rosebank oil field to the west of Shetland. The government says more oil will add to energy security, though the majority is expected to be sold to Europe and then re-imported as refined products. Ivor Bennett reports.
Rosebank, they say, is not all roses and very far from it. For these protesters, the green light for drilling there is a step towards climate catastrophe.
We feel completely betrayed. It's such a callous act of political opportunism.
Because it's our future. This is killing people. People are already dying in the global south, and people are going to be dying in the global north as well.
Rosebank is the UK's largest untapped oil field and sits 80 miles off the Shetland coast. From late 2026, Norwegian state oil giant Equinor could extract up to 69,000 barrels a day, a total of 300 million. Campaigners estimate it'll generate more emissions than 28 low-income countries do in a year. So across the country, demonstrators took to the streets, with Edinburgh among around 20 locations, while in London, hundreds gathered at the Department for Energy Security, which is what the government says this is all about.
The government insists it is still committed to its climate pledge of hitting net zero carbon emissions by 2050. But it says we will still need some oil and gas before then. So in its view, we might as well get that from the UK.
Hey, hey, ho, ho! Fossil fuels have got to go!
The government claims it'll lower our energy bills, but protesters say that's just smoke and mirrors.
That new oil and gas is going to make our bills cheaper is a lie. This oil is sold to the highest bidder on the global market. It's not our oil, so it has nothing to do with domestic energy security or lowering our bills. The way to do that is by transitioning to renewables.
Stop Rosebank just like you should.
And so campaigners are now preparing a legal challenge. For them, it really is life or death.
We think that there are clear grounds that it is unlawful, and we think so on three really separate grounds. The first is the climate impacts, the second is the local marine environmental impacts, and finally we're very concerned that there hasn't been enough transparency around the regulators' reasoning.
No new oil!
In a statement, the government said the UK is a world leader in reaching net zero and that Rosebank is at the heart of its plans. But now it has a fight on its hands, on the streets and in the courts. Ivor Bennett, Sky News.
A ban on single-use plastics will begin in England tomorrow, with all takeaway shops and restaurants stopped from handing out plastic cutlery and food containers. They'll have to offer environmentally friendly, biodegradable alternatives instead. Sky News has spoken to an owner of a fish and chip shop who agrees with the initiative, but says it comes with a hefty price tag of over £1,000 a year, which could cripple his business. Lisa Dowd reports.
For Ballysing, everything is going up. The cost of fish, oil, electric and gas, and now this.
These were the
traditional foam cups that we used to use for our curry sauce, mushy peas and our gravy. And these are the new cardboard ones.
By law, he has to swap, costing him nearly £1,000 a year.
I agree with the change. We need to be more sustainable to look after our planet. But it is a lot for us because as a small business, we've got to make a change so quick. It's all of a sudden. I don't feel that there's a lot of variety out there that we can choose from.
From tomorrow, certain types of polystyrene food containers and cups and single-use plastic plates and cutlery are banned in England. It follows a similar move by Scotland last year. A ban in Wales comes in soon. England uses 2.7 billion items of single-use cutlery every year, most of which are plastic. If all that cutlery was lined up, it would stretch around the world more than 8.5 times. The average person uses 37 single-use pieces of cutlery and 18 single-use plastic plates every year. Plastic pollution takes hundreds of years to break down, damaging oceans, rivers and land. The Westminster government has already banned plastic straws, stirrers and cotton buds. The carrier bag charge has taken billions out of circulation. But the recent changes to when the UK will hit net zero targets has infuriated environmentalists.
You can't tackle the climate crisis without tackling the plastic crisis. And so, along with all of the other really disappointing announcements that we heard from the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, we were also disappointed to hear more delays around recycling reforms as well, because this is a really crucial part of tackling the climate crisis and addressing our addiction to single-use plastics.
While pre-packed food is exempt from the ban, there'll be incentives for producers to use packaging that can be recycled. The government is also looking at measures to reduce the littering of other plastics, like wet wipes. Lisa Dowd, Sky News.
In Washington, House Republicans and Democrats have struck a deal to fund the government and avoid a shutdown. The House of Representatives voted at 335 to 91 on a short-term funding bill, which will keep the government open for another 45 days, if signed into law by President Biden. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy had this reaction shortly after the vote.
I do not believe our troops need to be punished for us not getting the work done. So I ask Congress, we'll stay in session the next 2 weeks, continue to work to get this done. But you cannot look the men and women in our military in the eye and ask them why they are not going to be able to pay their bills because the Senate hasn't done their work.
Well, our US correspondent James Matthews joins us now from Washington. So, James, what happens next and what's likely to be the outcome?
What happens is it goes from the House of Representatives, Gillian, to the Senate and thereafter to the desk of President Joe Biden for signing. That process, should it happen, and we expect that too. The White House, indeed, has already indicated that that's the way it wants this to go. Then come the midnight hour, when government shutdown was widely predicted and expected, it won't happen. Government will continue for 45 days at least. This bill that's been passed, it buys extra time, 45 days, to pin down the funding of the federal government. That's what this was all about. Funding had to be in place before the start of the new fiscal year at midnight tonight. And on the brink, 9 hours before that midnight hour, that's when this bill was passed through the House of Representatives with widespread bipartisan support, which should give it the momentum it needs to be carried through. And that takes away the prospect of a government shutdown and everything that would have entailed. Non-payment to members of the military, closure of various services, furloughed for hundreds of thousands of employees, delays at airports and so on. That will now not happen. But one thing I would point out, there are many loose ends in this agreement that has been reached, Gillian, one of which is the removal of a planned funding for Ukraine of $6 billion. That's not part of this new bill. Many Republicans didn't want it to be. The question will be, and central to discussions over the 45 days to come will be, how does that square with a commitment by a Democrat US government to fund Ukraine in its war effort?
Yes, interesting. James, thank you. Let's take a look now at some of the day's other news stories. And police in Lancashire are trying to find a convicted child rapist after he breached his licence conditions and being recalled to prison. Police say Stephen Pennington is a high-risk sex offender who presents a real risk to children and women. He has links to Blackburn, Wigan and Blackpool. In the United States, 5 people have died and 5 others have been critically injured after a truck carrying toxic ammonia crashed in central Illinois. The fumes from the overturned vehicle forced hundreds of nearby residents to evacuate their homes as emergency services struggled to get close to the scene. Hundreds of British troops are being made available to a NATO peacekeeping force in Kosovo after a build-up of Serbian troops on the border. It follows a deadly siege at a monastery in northern Kosovo last weekend, in which 4 people died. Kosovo's Prime Minister has said he fears Serbia is trying to destabilise his country, which it does not recognise. More than 100,000 refugees have now arrived in Armenia from Nagorno-Karabakh, according to the head of the UN Refugee Agency. That's most of the population of around 120,000 ethnic Armenians who fear what will happen after an Azerbaijani offensive to take control of the territory that has been internationally recognised as part of Azerbaijan. Diana Magnay reports.
A sorry milestone as this miserable exodus reaches its end. More than 100,000 ethnic Armenians have now left their homes in Nagorno-Karabakh in a little less than a week. Just 20,000 remain, and most of them are on their way out too.
When the shelling began, one of the children was playing outside and came home running and crying. The 5-month-old child was also crying in the other room, hearing the voice of his sister. It's like the bombs were falling down on our heads. I couldn't calm them down.
Armenia must house them where they can, those who have seen this long-standing conflict flare up before and those who've just experienced it for the first time. Azerbaijan's Ministry of Defense releasing footage of weapons captured, they say, from local Armenian defense forces. The targets of what they called a counter-terror operation, a blitzkrieg military offensive which overwhelmed their Armenian adversaries and forced this flight. Russian peacekeepers delivering flour and food to the few who remain in the regional capital of Stepanakert. But too little too late for a population who don't trust either Azerbaijan's or Russia's security guarantees. And there are other potential flashpoints too in these two neighbours' enduring enmity. Azerbaijan wants unfettered access to its exclave of Nakhchivan, nestled within Armenia itself, via what it calls the Zangezur corridor. And Armenia has precious few backers.
It's not only Russia that let down Armenians. The West, despite their promises, despite their calls, despite having United States having joint military maneuvers in Armenia, nobody came to the rescue of Armenians, neither Russia nor the Western powers.
This from one of Karabakh's journalists leaving now. Goodbye, Stepanakert, he writes. Can't believe what happened to you. Diana Magnay, Sky News, Moscow.
Time to catch up on all the sports news now with Mark.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
Tom, a couple of months on now from your retirement. How's that transition been from playing to coaching?
It's been exactly what I needed at that time in my life. You sort of banging your head against the wall, injury after injury and recurrent injuries, and yeah, you sort of lose your sense of purpose when you've known nothing but being a footballer for 15 years and your body just won't let you do that anymore. It was great to have to walk straight into something I'm passionate about, a club I'm passionate about, and yeah, I feel really lucky to have fell on my feet in such a good role that gives me a real sense of purpose in my life.
Was it difficult towards the end of your playing career? Did you have a few dark moments? Because when you've spent a whole lifetime playing football and then you realise that your career is coming to an end?
I think the most difficult thing to take, I felt like my technique and my lungs were all fully there. It's just my body wouldn't let me perform sustainably, and I just couldn't bang it out in the Championship game after game, and kept breaking down, and it was frustrating because I knew I was good enough to play at the top end of the Championship. I knew I was fit enough, as in like CV wise. It was just that, my body let me down one too many times, and to the point where I had to give in.
So you come into coaching, was that always the ambition?
Yeah, so I started doing my badges this time last year. Since I came back to Watford, I felt like I saw an opportunity where I could help younger players as captain over there, or as vice captain under Troy. I felt like it was my responsibility to help younger players, and yeah, it was always my motivation to become a coach. Maybe not this quickly, but like I said before, I'm lucky that this role was available for me at a club where developing players is I'm very passionate about. So it all fell into place.
So you're working in the academy system, but you came up as a professional through one of the best academies in world football. So how helpful is it for these young boys that you've been brought up in that environment?
Yeah, I'd like to think that they see it as a good opportunity to tap into my experiences. I know society's changed in the 15-20 years since I was an apprentice, and things are not always going to be the same, but I'd like to install the same values, the same principles, and it's key that I nip things in the bud that I sort of see straying away from that. And yeah, I will always take the values I learned from Manchester United throughout my whole playing career and coaching career.
What's the long-term ambition? Could we see Tom Cleverley Premier League manager in the future? Yeah,
that's my long-term goal. I mean, as a player, you set your standards high, and that'll be no different as a coach. Right now, I'm taking it day by day, learning every day. Made a decent start to life as an under-18s coach, and yeah, I feel like I've got the experience from playing, but you have to put in the hours as a coach.
You played under one of the very best managers. What was that like, playing under Sir Alex Ferguson?
Yeah, fantastic. The way how we managed the dressing room of superstars, of young players, of players that have won it all and kept them motivated. How we sort of recycled teams that year after year. Yeah, he was the genius, and he was. I don't think we'll see an out-and-out manager of a whole football club like that again. It's much more coaches are coaches now, and but yeah, he ran the football club top to bottom, and you see that the void that's left since he's gone.
Has he been in touch with any words of advice?
Yeah, I did a little piece for Watford last week, about 3 weeks ago when I was confirmed as the 18s coach. He reached out. We had 10-15 minutes on the phone talking about football, and of course some words of advice for, as a coach. So yeah, that was something that I'm really proud about, that someone like that would reach out, and yeah, I'm thankful for that.
You were part of the last Manchester United side to win the title. Are they any closer to winning it again? Are they on the right track under Erik ten Hag?
Listen, I like to be optimistic, but you have to be realistic, and I don't think...
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the writer and broadcaster, Amy Nicole-Turner, and the barrister, Andrew Eborn. We shall be right back. Don't go anywhere.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I'm based in Belfast, a city transformed by peace, but still struggling with its past. Politically, the two sides are as far apart as ever, and it's over that question of who has sovereignty in Northern Ireland. the very issue that's been the source of tension here for generations.
It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century.
I've spent 25 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
We help you understand the world with us.
Today, we have reached an agreement with the Conservative Party on support for government in Parliament.
We already know what the government gets out of this deal. What exactly does the DUP get out of it? Well, £1.5 billion. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama.
Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record.
You can't live in a place like this and not appreciate the environment.
The 5 of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
You are watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. The Iraqi couple whose wedding ended with the deaths of more than 100 people have told Sky News that their hopes of being happy have been destroyed forever. House Republicans and Democrats have struck a deal to fund the US government and avoid a federal shutdown. The family of the school bus driver who died in a crash yesterday say he suffered a medical issue at the wheel, as he and a 15-year-old victim have been named. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the writer and broadcaster Amy Nicole Turner and the barrister Andrew Eborn. Welcome to both of you. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you, first of all. The Sunday Express reports that amongst the measures to be unveiled at this week's Conservative Party conference will be a financial aid package of more than £1 billion aimed at reviving Britain's rundown high streets. The Sunday Times leads with a story on Kemi Badenoch piling the pressure on Rishi Sunak to quit the European Convention on Human Rights. The Observer has an exclusive poll of Tory voters, with 34% intending to switch their votes to other parties. The Sunday Mirror has a special report on Somalia's forgotten children, as 1.5 million of them are reported to be facing extreme hunger as the nation is gripped by its worst ever drought. The Sunday Telegraph reveals that Defence Secretary Grant Shapps is discussing the possibility of deploying British troops to Ukraine for the first time. And The Sun leads with the news that Downton Abbey star Hugh Bonneville has split from his wife of 25 years. Well, a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Amy Nicole-Turner and Andrew Eborn. Welcome again to both of you. And you both. Let us start with the front page of the Sunday Times. And this story, in the headline, making mention of Kemi Badenoch, and she apparently has said that leaving the European Convention on Human Rights needs to be put on the table, pressure mounting on Rishi Sunak.
And absolutely also saying it's not racist to discuss leaving the convention. It's one of these sort of hot things, and basically we need to turn around and say, well, OK, if we don't do that, what are we going to do in its place? And I think that's what they're talking about. They talked about within the Sunday Express, they talked about these new 5 policies they're going to have, one of which is to reduce immigration by halving the number of visas being awarded to migrant workers and foreign students and their families. And I think it's always one of these very emotive subjects, isn't it, when you're talking about quitting the ECHR, because you've then got to turn around and say, well, what are we going to replace it with? Because it's not just in a vacuum. You need to look at both sides of the story.
However, it's becoming increasingly popular to talk about leaving the ECHR. And in fact, I think most people don't really understand what underpins it. This was signed in by Churchill, who by Tory party standards is one of their absolute heroes, you would have thought. But on the Tory right, it's increasingly popular to discuss leaving this. But the key thing is it underpins the Good Friday Agreement. It underpins the power that we have as individuals to challenge the state. So this, to me, just seems like an absolutely extreme way of getting around what is basically to warrant deporting 200 traumatised people against their will to Rwanda. Yeah. It seems incredibly disproportionate. And I think the reason Kemi's decided to bring this up now is because, well, 'twas the night before Tory conference, yes. Is it not? And I think there is a possibility that this is going to become a leadership pitch for her. And she sees this as a quick way to please the right wing of the party, please the voters, but also concern the Tory moderates and concern a lot of people who have very valid problems
they are very valid.
with leaving the ECHR.
And what's happened as well is obviously people are just reminded all the time of Rishi's 5-point pledge, which is sort of reducing the boats and so on and so forth, which is one of the key things there. What I found interesting as well, which is in the Times, but it didn't make the front page, surprisingly, is that Jeremy Hunt let slip in an off-mic moment, which he didn't realise was being recorded, when he thought the next election would be. And he was sort of turning around and saying, well, when inflation gets below 3%, that's when we're going to call an election. And that's predicted to be around autumn time. So we can all be surprised when that happens.
Is the cat out of the bag? There is a lot of political manoeuvring going on at the moment. Like these policies being thrown out that they just know are like red meat. So I reckon after conference, we'll get a whole smorgasbord of this populist, let's face it, bit of nonsense. And then maybe an election.
Red meat to the red wall and the red corduroys.
But is it realistic?
Sam Coates was saying that it's more or less a beauty parade at conference for people vying for position should Rishi Sunak be ousted.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think the likes of Suella Braverman, who this week has gone completely against Rishi Sunak, he's already condemned what she said in Washington. She's going to be putting herself right at the front of that list this conference.
We shall see. Let's move on to the Telegraph and this story about Grant Shapps and plans for British troops in Ukraine, Andrew.
It's always a bit shocking when you have a headline like that, isn't it?
It did make us jump, didn't it?
And what you need to do is look beneath the headline, which is all about actually he's going to train, he's going to send some people over to train the military on the ground, and the Navy may move into the Black Sea as well. So we need to look at those particular details rather than just the scary bits about the headline saying going to send troops to Ukraine, because that would be horrendous on a major sort of political basis.
However, Ukraine currently have support. Biden sent the planes. Germany's given $2.4 billion in arms. We've sent arms, but we are in fact going to be the first to send troops, but crucially, troops to train the Ukraine personnel. But I think anything less than this, to me, is an insult to Ukrainian civilians. And, you know, James Cleverly has previously insisted that the UK will defend Ukraine until it is victorious. So I think this is just the next logical step, really. Their security is our security. This is an invasion on Western democracy. So I think the West have to come together to do everything they can.
But Andrew, you think that the headline is misleading?
Well, it is misleading because when you say send UK troops to Ukraine, you think they're going to be engaged in battle.
Yeah.
And that just takes it to a completely different level and is wrong. I think it is misleading on that basis. They are training in the same ways people have been giving weapons and so on and so forth. We're not the ones firing the weapons and we're not the ones sending in the troops to fight. I think that's the important point. And I think sometimes it's this inflammatory language that can be quite damaging. And often what you find with papers is you get the people who write the headlines are not the ones who write the copy.
So there's a disconnect.
There is a disconnect. So
we saw this outside and we said, what?
Yeah, exactly.
Until you read the actual article. Yes. Note to everybody.
Note to editors, yes.
Don't give us a heart attack.
The Express next, I think, this story about flagging high streets that Rishi Sunak is looking to help out now.
Don't you think this is hilarious? Rishi Sunak living up forgotten towns. Who forgot them, Rishi? The Conservatives are quite forgetful, aren't they, right? So why are they derelict? Could it be your 13 years of underinvestment or maybe austerity, basically starving the high street of all resources? I saw a poll today which said how good are job opportunities under the Conservatives, a YouGov poll, and 68% of people agreed that they're very bad.
Yeah.
So I think this is too little, too
Andrew,
late.
is he talking about correcting a problem that the Conservatives have created?
Well, it is interesting. I'm never really a fan of polls because it depends on how you phrase the question and who you ask on that sort of basis. So lies, damn lies and statistics, they always say, don't they? You're absolutely right. Work needs to be done. He talks about 55 run-down places.
But who ran them down? Well, he broke them. Now he's doing fiscal peanuts to fix them.
Well,
it's ridiculous.
The devil, as always, is going to be in the details. So they're talking about some quite large figures, $1 billion lifelines for derelict.
Well,
it depends on how it's spent, doesn't it?
55 run-down towns that they ran down, and now they're going to fix them with a $1 billion cash boost.
Well, I think one of the biggest problems we have in society at the moment is the lack of community. And some of these things don't necessarily take a huge amount of money. It's more about a mindset. And basically, you've got a lot of people where we had the TikTok riots, if you like, inspired by around Oxford Street by TikTok and people like Mizzy and so on and so forth. Basically, people are looking for role models. And the role models they're finding at the moment are bad role models. What we need to do is basically change that mindset.
But it's going to take a lot more than cash to do that. It's going to take investment in education. It's going to take investment in providing people with opportunity and aspiration, which they currently don't have.
But that all takes money as well.
Well, but a sense of community as well. It's also a mindset. And so it's not just cash. It's the sort of mindset we need good heroes as opposed to sort of negative heroes. And there are people out there, I know. And so that's what we need to do, is shine a spotlight on them in the media to make that make sense.
OK, let's move to another poll that you're not a fan of. This one saying that a third of Tory voters plan to switch allegiance. Amy?
A third of Tory voters plan to vote differently in the next election. Now, my thoughts on this are, could it be something to do with the priorities? So at the moment, we're hearing a lot from the government about immigration, but we're not hearing much about what they would do to fix, which is the number one concern, the cost of living crisis, closely followed by health. And if you look at health, one of Rishi's pledges was to cut NHS waiting lists. 87% of people disagree that he's done that and think he's doing very badly at that. So I think that's why people want to swap their vote. They're not seeing anything materialise. None of the pledges have we even seen remotely fulfilled. So I don't think this is surprising, really. Well, but it's just, where are they going to swap their vote to?
I think that's right.
Because I think most people are reluctant. The real grassroots Tories, they don't really want to go to Labour. So could this mean a boost in the Liberals?
Well, I think what's going to happen, this is why you have these headline sound bites and a fairly easy sort of list, which is why the Jeremy Hunt leaked audio was so interesting, is you know that inflation, when it was originally, 11.1%, wasn't it? When Rishi made that pledge to halve it, which was not a very ambitious
and isn't really in his control anyway.
And you work on that sort of frame. So you're going to get these headlines, reducing, big fanatic for things like artificial intelligence, for reducing waiting lists, this, and they talk about using technology for those sort of things. So make the headlines really dramatic and say this is a big problem, and then basically what's going to happen is going to drip feed those solutions all the way through. So, for example, using AI has made certain things incredibly efficient in terms of reducing
a lot of people hear AI and imagine job losses.
And you're right, 300 million is what Goldman Sachs said, but you need to work out there are positive things as well with AI. And we are discovering seismic changes in medicine, in way that things were advances. There have been cures for all sorts of diseases.
Sure, but definitely pros and cons with AI. Amy and Andrew, for the moment, thank you. We're going to take a break. Coming up, we'll look at claims that the Department for Education is keeping secret files on its critics. More on that when we come back.
I mean, this is one of the rare occasions we've brought back samples from the solar system to study. We've got moon rocks, we've got samples of the wind from the sun, other samples from asteroids we've got, but this is a particularly large sample from a very important type of asteroid, which will tell us something about the origin of the solar system, and also, should we ever need to deflect an asteroid that's threatening us, it'll tell us something about the structure of the asteroid.
So they have to make sure that they're kept pristine. You don't want to have any Earth particles, disrupting this contaminating that sample. So they've moved it now to a special laboratory curation place in Johnson Space Center. They'll be very, very carefully taking away the layers from the spacecraft, and we're hoping within about 10 days they'll actually open the capsule, which has got the sample inside.
It belongs to the United States. It's their mission. It landed on their territory. So although they will store 3/4 of it for future reference, because in the future we'll have better techniques to analyse it, and it's a limited resource, they will only analyse a fraction of it, and they will give it to scientists. The good thing about this science is that any scientist anywhere in the world, if they come up with a good idea to analyse it, they will get a piece of this asteroid.
It's like a time capsule for the solar system. Like, it's come from very early on when planets were forming, but it gives us it will give us a view into what things were happening then, and hopefully it will give us some idea of how the solar system formed, and also potentially what were the elements that caused the origins of life on this planet if they came to Earth from similar asteroids. Well, they were actually going to do a special manoeuvre that would have allowed them to measure exactly what the weight of the sample was, but when they sort of went down and scooped up, you say, rather more than they expected, they actually had a bit of an issue with closing the capsule properly, and they started losing little bits of it. So they didn't perform that manoeuvre and rather just concentrated on sealing the capsule and bringing as much of it as they could back down to Earth. So that's why we think it's 250 grams. That's from some, very smart maths and, orbital mechanics that they've sort of hoped that. But until they get it out and actually weigh it, we're not 100% sure.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Amy Nicole-Turner and Andrew Eborn. And we're going to start this section by having a look at the front page of The Observer. And this sort of cloak and dagger story, the Education Ministry keeps secret files on critics of schools policy.
Shocking, isn't it? And
Very
this is
intriguing.
off the back of journalists who said the similar sort of thing, that they've been having their social media being monitored. And the experts, quite rightly, are demanding to see these dossiers because apparently the Department of Education, they've tried to cancel unsuitable speakers. I think we need to know what's going on, what's being monitored and why it's being monitored.
Well, I think we know why it's being monitored. But first of all, this is costing taxpayer money to do this. It's being monitored because, of course, the critics are quite a lot of them at the moment. I mean, we used to say the education sector was crumbling, but now it literally is crumbling because of the rack concrete scandal. That paired with seeing ministers constantly saying, we're spending more than ever on schools, when actually, of course, yeah, there's more pupils than ever, and you're spending significantly less per pupil. There's a lot of emphasis in this also on them keeping tabs on the early years and when you should start assessing children, which is something that a lot of educational experts say isn't good for children, but policy and popularity, the politicians don't really want to go near that. So they've been silencing these critics to keep this out of the public domain.
Well, the article's saying at least 9 experts have uncovered files held on them, some as long as 60 pages.
Yeah.
But to what? The question has to be, to what end?
Yes. Well, and also in the fact that it's been told to them, they're obviously no longer a secret. The fact, if you tell somebody they're being watched, it means they're going to be slightly more cautious as to what they say and so on and so forth. With all of these things, and what I love about this show is we like to shine more light and less heat on the topic. You've got a massive headline again saying, keep secret files on this. It sounds very sort of Eastern European in the bad old days and so on and so forth. You need to work out why this has happened. And as I said, there was a similar story not so long ago about journalists. And basically they were having their social media monitored and so on and so forth. And these files were being kept on them. You need to work out to what end. Is it to silence them or something else?
It's because they're being critical of government policy. And nobody wants to be seen, especially at this time of uncertainty, when so many people are unhappy with the education sector. They want to keep as much criticism in the bottle as they possibly can.
So the question is this,
Free
then,
speech,
what happens?
democracy?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, of course, it's awful. It shouldn't be happening at all.
Well, the question is, what do they do with that information? And the suggestion is that some of them have cancelled what they classify as unsuitable speakers. Now, if that's the case, we need to know...
Yeah.
I mean, there was an extraordinary report, I don't know if you saw it, which was done by the... basically for the freedom of speech within universities for the and academics. And they worked out that 200 times as much is spent on EDI as it is on free speech. And you have all sorts of obligations under the Human Rights Act and so on and so forth to make sure that you have freedom of speech touted in the right sort of way, whilst at the same time ensuring that you do cover various other things as well.
Well, let's move to a similar story, which I don't know if this is a worrying trend. This is on the front page of the Telegraph, and this one regarding Labour and them wanting to also seemingly silence critics.
It is strange, isn't it? They're sort of talking about Labour lawfare targets private schools critical of the VAT raid. And we need to put this into perspective, is school fees, and a lot of people will save a huge amount of their income to put their children with a possible better start in life. That it's not these big schools which cost a lot of fortune.
It's not a huge amount because 93% of students will go to a state school, so it's actually...
Well, a huge amount of money, I mentioned, not as a percentage.
Yeah, but we are still talking about...
So a lot of families will be saving that. If you put an extra 20% on top of that, the reality is, when we look behind the headline, which I hate to do, you look behind that, it's going to finish a lot of those sort of things. A lot of those schools which are just on the balance won't be able to do it. A lot of families who've got this aspirational, we'll save up our money because we want our children to go to these places, won't be able to afford it. That's the scandal of it. And I think that's the thing. So people being critical of that, we need to know why they are and look at those facts and figures.
And I think it's estimated that it would affect about 40,000 children. And I know in my heart that the policy is probably right, but I can't help but think that those 40,000 children who have already had their education disrupted by COVID are going to have their education disrupted again. And it's not going to touch wealth, it's going to touch income again, because the people who are paying for those school fees term to term will be the ones that can't save up and pay ahead or just do the 20% on top. So I don't think it's getting the wealthiest, which surely is the point of any policy like this. People that can afford
and
it.
the crux of the issue is it's not only the wealthy who send their children
No,
to private
this is
school.
going to
There are
affect
many people who,
earners.
you know, really sacrifice in order to be able to send
And
their
it's totally
children
that. It's
to
a
school.
sacrifice. And if you have to put an extra 20% on, they're no longer going to be able to afford to make that sacrifice. And that's what you need to do. So the mission, they say, part of the mission is to put more money into the education sector, and it may not work.
Let's just have a quick look at the Matt cartoon.
Oh, I love this. Matt is a
Get this, and we've only got about 30 seconds.
He's picked this. So he says, if you can get expelled from your private school before the next election, there's 50 quid in it for you. I love it. It's got to be good. Matt is brilliant at encapsulating just the right thing.
Always brilliant. Thank you very much for the moment, Amy and Andrew. Lovely to end on a Matt cartoon. Let's take a look at the weather boy now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, conditions will remain mixed over the next few days with low pressure in charge, but high pressure will build in the south from midweek onwards with the promise of some more settled and warmer weather for some parts of the country. Sunday will begin with 3 clear areas of weather. Scotland and Ireland will be bright and breezy with a scattering of showers, mostly in the northwest. Wales and northern England will be cloudy with outbreaks of rain, which will turn heavy at times, especially in the west. Southern areas will be mostly dry and mild, with a mixture of cloud and brighter spells.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.